Quick
Yeah.
comment, which is probably more synchronistic than anything, is that the word in the Turkic, Turco-Altaic languages, the word for moon is also I.
Oh, really? That's really the Turkic. I'd love to talk with you more about that stuff. I think the Indo-European, yeah, Turkey is a very interesting place, and the Hittite culture is very confusing. Who were they? Um, there's a lot of the Indo-Europeans came from where Prometheus was, the north of the Caucasus Mountains where he was chained. This is where the Indo-Europeans started. We all speak Indo-European languages, from Hindi to French, Latin, all of them. They're all Indo-European languages. So the Indo-Europeans came down and they were huge in the founding of metallurgy, historically, is related to Prometheus. So they come down from north of the Caucasus Mountains and they spread east towards, and you have the Indo-Iranian, Indo-European Iranian languages, then going down into the Vedic languages, and then it goes west towards Greece, and then the next generation towards Rome, and then the next generation even further. And this is the Indo-European expansion, but we will maybe another time we'll talk about the Indo-Europeans.
That's also the place where wine was first invented.
Really? And that's fast. That's cool. Thanks. Okay, so let's do Adam and Eve. You guys are more familiar with this story. I'm gonna do again just a short reading at the beginning, especially short on this one. So, the story of Adam and Eve in Eden has been perceived as a foundation and propagated as inspiration everywhere that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have become the dominant religion for at least some period of time. This includes a majority of the Middle East, Mediterranean, Western Europe, Russia, and the Caucasus, the Americas, South Pacific, Australia, and parts of Africa. Additionally, Christianity is growing in influence within China, Korea, and Japan. In all reality, there are few corners of the world that the Abrahamic mythologies have not reached and substantially influenced. According to Abrahamic traditions, the story is the account of first humans, first knowledge, and the inciting incident of life's labors. As such, the story of Eden has participated in the conscious and unconscious formation of thoughts, memories, and belief systems for thousands of years and billions of people. Unique versions of the story have been written by Jews, Christians, Muslims, Egyptians, Georgians, Greeks, Romans, Irish, and Englishmen. Americans like Mark Twain and Joseph Smith recorded variants. Some versions are highly religious, as in Genesis, the Quran, and the Christian books of Adam. Others are folkloric, like the Midrash and Talmud, or fairy tale-like, as in Hans Christian Andersen's Garden of Paradise. Examples like Canterbury Tales, Paradise Lost, The Divine Comedy, and the Saltaire Naran, Irish, blur the lines between epic poetry and religious myth. While a certain historic and religious weight will be given to the version found in Genesis, which is older than these others, this dissertation is especially interested in the unique nuances and repetitive qualities that the collection reveals. I've read all those versions, and the version I'm going to tell is somewhat of it's a conglomerate of all of them, and I will do my best to be responsible to point out where we're going from which places and stuff like that. So, before the fall of Adam and Eve, as Zaman taught me a couple of years ago, was the fall of Iblis, the fall of who we in the West or in the Christian tradition in America, we know more as Satan. It's a more familiar term, but and I wouldn't want to oversimplify and call Iblis exactly Satan either. But
how do you spell that?
Iblis, right? Yeah.
Yeah, double ES or triple ES.
So so there.
Yeah.
I'm gonna actually ask Zaman after I get through this if he wants to add a note or two or a note on this part of the story, because he's really an expert on this. I interviewed him on this topic on Mythosophia. So if you're really interested in Adam and Eve, I recommend especially the Islamic version and especially a mystical interpretation. I recommend that interview. So Iblis is a jinn. He's a fire creature. He's made of fire. Adam is made from earth. In some versions, he's made from all the elements. But in this story, it's important that he's also specifically made from earth, because as a fire creature, what fire creature would want to bow to something lower than itself, that is earth? I've got to say another part first. One day, the angels, who had never defied God, somebody went around asking what would happen if somebody disagreed, defied, or went against God. And maybe more nuanced, detailed than that. But Iblis, who is like the closest to God at this point, is like that would be disaster, awful, and horrible things, and I think he says they should be banished, punished. And so later, Iblis, after having said this, is asked to bow to Adam, the creation of the first human who's made from earth. And again, he's made of fire, and he's like, why would fire bow to earth? I'm older, he's younger, why would the old bow to the young? I'm God, you're God, I want to bow to you, and he's a man, why would I bow to him? But the problem is, these are all reasons for him not to bow to Adam. See, the problem is he disobeyed God when he asked him to do it, and then when God asked him, why didn't you do it, he gave him reasons. He gave him excuses. That's not what happened to Adam and Eve. They might have shifted the blame a little bit here and there. But they're basically sorry and repentive and beg for forgiveness. And that's not what Iblis does. So Iblis is banished to hell. And in this Islamic version, this is Islam, but also the Milton English version. He heavily influenced. Zaman has taught me is influenced by this Islamic version. And in Paradise Lost, which I recommend a million times over, wonderful book. In Paradise Lost, Satan is also sent into exile. So these is Christian, Islamic, but then also in the Jewish version, you know the story of the angels coming and mating with the humans, and they teach them fire, and they teach them skills, all types of skills, and this is at the top of Mount Hermon. Of course, disaster happens, and these big problems from the offspring, and these become the fallen angels in the Jewish tradition. So this is the Jewish version of these fallen angels. Beelzebub's in there. So now let's go back to Satan and Iblis. Satan. Now we're going to call him whichever one and get blurry with it. In all of his minions, his fallen angels are in hell, and he wants out. So he escapes from hell, to make a long story short, and he crosses the great void of darkness, searching, and he sees heaven closed up, and he sees earth hanging like a pendant, like a fruit, and he decides he's going to pluck it. And his way to get back at God is through humans. So he goes, he finds his way to Eden, and he can't get in. There are many different versions of how he gets in. In some versions, Eve lets him in. In some versions, it's this weird bird. In some versions, it's a peacock. In the Islamic version, it's a peacock who symbolizes pride. So it's pride that allows Iblis in. And in another version, it's the snake who's literally talked into letting him share his body. Whatever the case, he gets in. Meanwhile, as you know, Adam's been created in the image of a creator, his creator, from clay, brought to life by breath. And I just want to pause to point out that saying that the clay was brought to life by breath implies that body had no life until the breath. The breath and the body are separate. The life, the soul, and the body are separate. Similarly, in the Prometheus story, he makes humans from clay, and then it's Athena often gives him a light that helps bring them to life. So the life is separate from the body, and this is really important to my thesis. And that's the last thing I'll do that's really important in my thesis. But do note, brought to life by the breath. Of course, Eve is brought to life from his rib, or his tail, or his face, depending on the version of the story. And depending on the version of the story, she is there to be his helper slave, or his ultimate pleasure and bliss in this world. Whatever the case, she's seduced by the serpent to eat the fruit that they've been, told not to eat. So they're naming all the animals, talking freely with the animals in some versions, and Eve is seduced into eating the fruit. She's convinced that she won't surely die, that she'll get the knowledge of the gods, and that it's going to be good to eat. And of course, she seduces Adam. He comes to eat, and then they hide. They cover their shame, and this is where the overlap between the original sin, the first food, and also the first sex, the things that will cause mortal life, eating and sexual mortality. These are the crucial cycles. So Whenever you see the fig, for example, in the Sistine Chapel, it's a fig tree. Nobody knows which tree, right? It's a big debate which tree, but sometimes it's represented as a fig, and when it is, I think it's not just a big dick joke because it's the biggest leaf in the nature, but I think it's also to represent sexuality, because the fig is highly associated with sexuality, and to go into that would be quite a tangent. So, they're hiding. They're ashamed. They're hiding double. They're hiding their bodies with clothes. They're hiding. They've seen their own skin. They realize, I'll come back to that. God comes. Why are you hiding? Right? And then, of course, Adam says, what happened? Did you eat the fruit that I commanded you not to eat? Adam says, oh, she gave it to me and she told me to eat. She says, oh, the serpent gave it to me. He told me to eat. And then, of course, come the three curses. He curses the serpent to crawl on his belly. If he had legs, they're gone after that. He eats dust from then on. He bites at the heels of humans, and humans stomp their heels on his face. The woman, cursed to childbirth, to labor pains. The man, cursed to labor in the field. As again in the Prometheus story, the dual labor curse. Laboring for food, laboring for children. Man labors for food in the field, and it's no good, and it's really hard, and it's really, really hard. She labors for children, and that's really, really hard, and it hurts a whole lot. And this is crucial symbolism of the fallen state. Now, in the Christian retellings of the story, which, by the way, when they were first becoming popular, it was believed that they were from 400 BC and that they were prophecies of Christ. But now, most scholars are convinced they're from after Christ, and they're like post. You write the prophecy after it's already happened, kind of thing. And in these stories, they're still the oldest Christian stories of Adam and Eve. Books of Adam, they're generally summarized as Cave of Treasures. And by the way, some of these stories, the Georgian Book of Adam, come from the Caucasus. But anyway, so in these stories, they're exiled. And in the Islamic story, Adam and Eve fall and they're separated from each other, and it's epic when they come back together. In this Christian version, they enter into the Cave of Treasures. And when they enter into the Cave of Treasures, it's dark, they cannot see, very much like Plato's cave. And their senses start to change, and they start talking about how much their senses are changing, and they've gone from being able to see the divine to now only being able to see the material world. All their senses change. And then their organs change, and they go from being able to eat the fruit of Eden to only being able to eat material food. And then sexuality, then they have children. And the woman becomes a mother, and she has Abel. And the first child becomes the first murderer, reinforcing again and again and again the infinite connection between birth and death. Then this story concludes with Adam and Eve both being buried, sometimes separately, sometimes together, and Adam is there left buried. Now, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims all just tell the story of Adam's burial, and they all tell it in a different place. And this is where I have to be honest and say that the story shifts into a more Christian myth than the others, because I can't follow the rest down this road, because I'm going to now go into the Christian, what happened. I will note a couple things later, but